It wasn't a scandal whispered by tabloids or a rumor planted by enemies. It was the moment Prince Harry realized the biggest secret of his life had been hidden from him, and once that door cracked open, there was no way to close it again. This is not the story the world thought it knew. This is not about headlines, critics, or palace men. This is about a man sitting alone, staring at a truth so explosive it threatened to rewrite his identity as a husband, a father, and a son of the crown. It began quietly. That's how the most devastating truths always arrive. No shouting, no confrontation, just an envelope, plain, unmarked, waiting. Prince Harry sat in his Montecito study, the California sunlight slicing through the blinds like thin knives. On his desk lay a single envelope, sealed and untouched. Across the front, typed with surgical calm, were 4 words that stopped his breath. Private Dina, confirmation results. He didn't open it. Not immediately. Now, for a man who had faced combat, media mobs, and the collapse of his royal life, this felt heavier than all of it combined. Outside the room, faint laughter drifted through the house. Children's laughter. Archie, Lilibet. Sounds that had once been his refuge, proof that walking away from the monarchy had been worth the cost. But now, that laughter sounded different. It carried weight, doubt. A question he had spent years refusing to ask. Because that envelope wasn't about reassurance. It was about confirmation. And somewhere deep down, Harry already knew the truth wouldn't be kind. The cracks hadn't appeared overnight. They had crept in slowly, quietly, disguised as details that didn't quite line up, easy to dismiss when love demanded loyalty over logic. Timelines that felt off. Medical details that were vague or sealed. Records delayed longer than they should have been. Meghan had insisted on privacy, and Harry had defended that fiercely. Every question raised by outsiders felt like an attack, and he shut them down without hesitation. Trust, he told himself, mattered more than paperwork. Love mattered more than protocol. But silence doesn't erase questions. It amplifies them. Late at night, when the house was still, Harry would replay moments in his mind. Conversations that never fully resolved. Doctors he was never properly introduced to. Decisions made quickly without explanation. Each time the doubt surfaced, he buried it again, because questioning the truth meant questioning everything he had sacrificed. And that was too terrifying to face. Archie's birth was the first time the whisper became a voice. For the first time in modern royal history, the birth didn't follow precedent. No confirmed hospital staff. An announcement that came late. Documentation handled quietly, selectively behind palace doors. People noticed. Inside the system, notes were made. Concerns were raised. At one point, a request for Danya verification surfaced. It was denied. The midwife who raised the issue didn't last long afterward. Officially, it was labeled a breach of confidentiality. Unofficially, the message was unmistakable. This was not a question anyone was allowed to ask. Harry was never told. At the time, he believed the silence meant safety, that nothing was wrong, that privacy had been respected. He didn't realize silence had become a shield, not for him, but from him. That was the first rule broken. Truth no longer came first. And once that rule collapsed, everything else followed. If Archie's birth raised eyebrows, Lilibet's arrival erased coincidence entirely. By the time the second pregnancy was announced, Harry had learned how to ignore his instincts. He had trained himself to trust reassurance over reality. But this time, the inconsistencies multiplied. Different clinics, different paperwork, different timelines. There were unexplained absences, stretches where Meghan disappeared for what were described as private treatments. When Harry asked where she was going, the answers were vague. When he asked who was overseeing her care, names never came. Then came the announcement. Quick, polished, almost rehearsed. Released with urgency as if timing mattered more than transparency. Behind closed doors, tension spread. The palace claimed ignorance. Meghan's team insisted on privacy, but internally, even senior figures reportedly acknowledged something wasn't adding up. 2 children, 2 births, 2 sets of unanswered questions. At that point, doubt stopped feeling like betrayal and started feeling like survival. Then came the letter, no return address, no signature, just one word word written carefully across the front: truth. Inside was a short message: cold, precise, deliberate. It directed Harry to a closed fertility clinic in Los Angeles and referenced a specific archived file, one that had been moved, hidden, and sealed years earlier. The name barely registered at first, then memory caught up. The clinic, the doctor. A name Meghan had once mentioned casually years earlier, during a period when they were struggling to conceive. Harry didn't tell anyone. No security, no entourage, just instinct. The clinic was abandoned, dust covered, forgotten. But in the back office, against a cracked wall, stood a filing cabinet labeled Archived Patient Records. Inside was the file, initials MC. What Harry found wasn't rumor, it wasn't speculation, it was documentation. Consent forms for assisted reproduction, legal authorizations, confidential records. And then the line that changed everything: father not biologically linked. Donor replacement approved. The authorization hadn't come from him, it had come from an external legal representative. Confidentiality justified under public safety and privacy concerns. Harry's name did not appear as the biological father. The decision had been made without him. Back in Montecito, the envelope still waited. When Harry finally opened it, there was no drama, no exaggeration, just clinical language that left no room for interpretation. No genetic match, no paternal link, not with Archie, not with Lilibet. He read it once, then again, then again. The words didn't change. Outside, life continued. Birds sang. The house creaked softly. Somewhere down the hall, children laughed. And in that moment, Harry understood something more painful than anger. He hadn't just lost certainty, he had lost the version of fatherhood he believed was his. The love was still real, the bond still existed. But the truth had poisoned something sacred. Worse than the betrayal itself was the realization that this truth hadn't been hidden from everyone. It had been hidden from him. And that was only the beginning. Because once Harry had the proof in his hands, the next question wasn't, is it true? The next question was, who else already knew? And how long have they been laughing behind my back? He didn't march to the media. He didn't run to lawyers. Not yet. First, Harry did what a man does when his world tilts off its axis. He reached for someone who had seen the machine from the inside. Not a friend from California. Not a PR fixer. Someone who'd watched the palace operate for decades. Someone who understood how quickly privacy turns into control when the crown is protecting itself. This was about something darker, a system that had managed his life like a public product and now had managed his children the same way. He wasn't protected from scandal, he was managed. He started thinking back. Every time he'd been told don't worry, every time a door closed gently in his face, every time a detail was handled, he had believed they were respecting boundaries. But now, with the report burning in his hands, he saw the truth. Silence wasn't a gift, it was a muzzle. And then came the worst realization of all. If the palace had been involved, even indirectly, if they had known enough to shut people up, then Harry wasn't the only one being lied to. He had been the last to know. And Harry, hot-headed, wounded, proud Harry, could handle being mocked by the world. He'd lived through that his entire life. But being played in his own home, that was something else. That was humiliation with teeth. So when he finally confronted Meghan, it wasn't with yelling, it wasn't with theatrics, it was with a quiet voice that sounded like it belonged to a stranger. He placed the report on the table, not slammed, placed. And he watched her eyes, because eyes always tell the truth before mouths catch up. Tell me, Harry said, his voice low, controlled, almost dead calm. Tell me why this exists. For a second, she stared like she couldn't recognize the paper, like it was written in another language. And then something shifted. Not shock, not confusion. Exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying a lie for too long and knowing the weight is finally about to crush you. She didn't scream, she didn't deny it. And that silence was louder than any confession. Meghan told him she'd known for a long time that pregnancy could be dangerous. She said doctors had warned her privately. She said they tried everything. She painted it like a desperate battle behind closed doors, like she was the one suffering while the world demanded a fairy tale. And maybe some of that was real. But then Harry asked the one question that ripped the curtain down. So why didn't you tell me? That's where her story cracked. She said she was afraid of what he'd hear, afraid of what he'd do, afraid he'd spiral. She said she wanted children, she wanted a family, she wanted to give him what he'd always craved, a home that wouldn't abandon him. And this is where the truth turned cold, because she admitted there was a plan, a private fertility specialist, a program no one would talk about, a process that started with his Dina and ended without it. And when complications came, when timelines tightened and pressure from outside grew, she made a decision without him. A donor. Approved. Chosen. And Harry, Prince Harry, the man who left the monarchy to protect his family, was sitting there realizing he didn't even have basic consent in the creation of that family. He wasn't a partner in the most intimate decision of his life. He was an accessory. He asked about the file, the authorizations, the external legal representative, and Meghan didn't fight it. She said it was done for privacy, for safety. She implied the palace would never accept messiness. She implied it had to be perfect, clean, controlled, because the monarchy doesn't survive on truth. It survives on optics. And that's when Harry's anger finally moved, like a storm rolling in. Not at the kids, never at the kids, but at the betrayal wrapped in motherhood like a shield. He looked down the hall, heard the children laughing, and something inside him split in two. The father who loved them with every bone in his body, and the man who had just realized his entire life had been scripted. And then Meghan said a name. A man Harry had seen her meet. A man who kept appearing in the background like a shadow. A man who wasn't just a doctor, not in the way she described. She tried to soften it, said it wasn't planned, said it just happened, said she was vulnerable, stressed, alone, but Harry didn't hear excuses. He heard the sound of the last illusion dying. Because this wasn't only about biology anymore. It was about intimacy, trust. The kind of betrayal that doesn't just break a marriage, it rewrites your past and makes you question every smile you ever believed. He didn't explode. That's what makes it chilling. Harry went quiet. He sat there with the report, with the confession, with the realization that two things could be true at once. He could love Archie and Lilibet more than life itself, and still feel like the ground under him had turned to ash. He realized something savage and simple: blood was never the most powerful bond. Silence was. Silence allowed decisions to be made without him. Silence turned protection into control. Silence kept a man from his own truth for years. And now that silence was broken. And once silence is broken, people panic. Because Harry wasn't just a husband with a marital crisis, Harry was a prince with receipts. He had the kind of truth that doesn't stay private forever. Not when it touches royalty, lineage, titles, public narratives, and the carefully polished image sold to the world. And in that moment, Harry understood the real danger. Not the press, not the trolls, not even the palace. The danger was what happens next when a man who was never meant to know finally decides he won't unsee what was hidden from him. Because this story doesn't end with Dina. It starts with what the fallout could become when the truth is no longer managed and the person holding it is done being controlled.